Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our attendees. Thank you so much for joining us today for what I know will be an exciting and informative discussion on AI in the life sciences. I'm Nikki McManus, member of the HBS Healthcare Alumni Association Board, and I'm here with Dr. Trishan Ponch, president of the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. Feel free to please, join the chat. Tell us where you're logging in from. We're both in the Boston area. I know we've got a number of esteemed panelists here we'll be introducing you to shortly. We're really excited to be collaborating across the HBS and HSPH alumni associations. This is the third event in the series. The last two can be accessed in YouTube. We've got AI at the clinical front lines and applied AI in healthcare out there already. And if you've listened to those and are joining us again, thank you for that. We know, healthcare is complicated, it's slow. When it comes to bringing new drugs to market, we all want to get what works in healthcare to help the greatest number of people while ensuring fair distribution across different demographics. And we know there's huge potential to apply AI to achieve this. Today, we're bringing together different and valuable perspectives, medical, business, and public health, on how best to initiate and scale these ideas. We're really focused, and I know Trishan will emphasize this, on the practical application of AI, with these amazing panelists who are focused on this every day, and we're excited to have you hear from them and learn from them. On the logistics front, thank you to Susan Calcio, David, Rogers, and Marielle, and the rest of the team for making this happen. And we'll have time for questions after hearing from our panel, but I'll be gathering those throughout as Trishan's moderating. So please put those into the Q&A as you keep the chat going too. The session's being recorded, and you can find information about both of mine and Trishan's upcoming programs on our websites. So I'll hand over to Trishan for his intro, and look forward to speaking with you all.
Hello. Can you hear me? Oh, sorry.
I can hear you.
I thought I got kicked off at exactly the wrong time. It's hi everyone. Yeah, really nice to see you all, and thanks for joining us. So we've got a panel. We've got a lot of stuff coming. So I'm just going to give you like a quick introduction for context. So this is obviously live, totally one take, as you've just seen from our little technical glitch at the beginning there. We have all kind of met before and discussed this. I think the focus of this panel, just like all the other ones, is we want to bring you some kind of practical wisdom, right? Because there's so much stuff you can read in the media around what might happen in the future and what was going to be revolutionized and all the kind of profound things that are about to happen. But it's very difficult if you're working in the front lines, either clinically or in management or in leadership, of a healthcare organization, to kind of separate the signal from the noise, understand what's real, understand what you actually should be looking at versus what the kind of folly or irrational exuberance. So what the purpose of this session is to bring together people who are very thoughtful, very experienced practitioners, basically share their experience. And we've also brought together people who come from a spectrum of life sciences and have a bunch of kind of very much intentional. I think the only other thing to mention before we kind of get straight into it is that we are at a really profound point of acceleration. I mean, all of us have been in this field for a while. I think it's been going last 2 years, last year particularly, is really kind of paradigmatically different. And we have an acceleration in machine learning, very much kind of catalyzed by these things called large language models based on a technical insight, the transformer architecture that's been applied to language. But then now those same things that were applied to language have also been used with some modifications and iterations on things like protein folding and core issues in biology that weren't necessarily logically related when people were first thinking about this a couple of years ago. So in the spirit of that, what I've asked, I took GPT-3, which I guess we'll mention a number of times during this, and I asked it, our friends at GPT-3, to help us by writing an intro to this session, and not just writing an intro to this session, but writing an intro to this session in the spirit of a rap. It's a short rap that I'm going to attempt to kind of do for you. If you feel motivated to fill in the musical side, please do. I'd extend that to the panelists as well. If they want to kind of start off their oeuvre here with a bit of beatboxing, you're more than welcome. And I'm going to do my best. It's short, you'll be pleased to know. Okay. What's good, HBS and HSPH alumni? It's your boy here to bring you some knowledge on AI. In the life, it's a game changer, revolutionizing the way we treat and cure cancer. From predicting outcomes to analyzing data, AI is making waves in the world of health and medicine, helping doctors and researchers make better decisions and giving patients access to personalized treatments. But with great power comes great responsibility. As we navigate the ethical implications of AI, consider the impact on privacy and bias, and strive for transparency and accountability. So let's dive into this panel discussion with experts in the field to share their insights and opinions on the potential and pitfalls of AI in the life sciences. It's time to elevate. Let's get ready to rock and roll with a lively debate and some thought-provoking questions. It's time to explore the role of AI and how it can shape the future of medicine. So, I hope everyone caught that.
That was great, Trishan.
Yeah, great. So I wasn't sure as I had to switch over to another screen there. So, okay, so let's kind of get to it. I'm gonna, rather than introduce the folks, I'm gonna ask them to introduce themselves. We will start with the first question of, just tell us a little bit about what you do, and I'll just go in the order that people are on the screen. So first we have our good friend, Aman Bhandari.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. Aman Bhandari. I head up our corporate data science team in a company called Vertex Pharmaceuticals. And at Vertex, we are very focused on very serious diseases and bring forward transformative medicines. And just to give you a couple of examples, we're in cystic fibrosis, and then in late stage clinical trials and things like pain, type 1 diabetes, some rare kidney diseases, and a whole host of other areas. And so I run that team here, and we're based, have a headquarters based in Boston with a couple of thousand people, and we'll tell you more about it as we get into it. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Alan. Welcome. Liz?
The mute button. So Trishan, when I was in high school, if you can imagine, I was a class president, and I started my valedictorian and presidential speech with a rap, and I'm feeling the challenge to see if I can go back. So it was Rapper's Delight, and I said a hip, a hop, the hip into the hip hip hop, you don't stop.
Oh,
Rock it to the boogity beat. Yeah, I don't know. It's been quite some time. I just had my high school reunion, but anyway, so thank you for kicking off the talk in that spirit. So I'm Liz O'Day. I am the CEO and founder of Alaris. We are a precision diagnostic company. I started the company now 8 years ago as a spin out from my PhD at Harvard, where I developed the underlying technology, where we combine metabolomics and machine learning to develop tools that hopefully will improve how we both diagnose and treat disease. In addition, I am also an investor. I have an angel fund called O'Day Cap, and who knows, maybe I'll bring back my rap career.
Cool. I hope so. All right, Gaurav. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Trishan. I'll leave the wrapping to you and Liz. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a physician and computer scientist by original background. Went to medical school here in Boston, ended up becoming a physician, still see patients at the Brigham as a member of the faculty at Harvard Medical School. But most of my career over the last 15 years has been building companies at the intersection of healthcare, data, and tech across a number of different fields: natural language processing, personalizing preventive health, clinical trials. Most recently, I was the chief data officer of Foundation Medicine, Cambridge-based cancer genomics company, built the data group there. And now I run an investing and advisory practice supporting just north of 20 clients across diagnostics, therapeutics, venture, private equity, and very excited about this topic. So thanks for having me.
Cool. Thank you very much. Jennifer?
Thanks. Nice to be here with everyone today. My name is Jennifer Lum, and I'm one of the co-founders and managing partners of a growth equity firm called BioSpring Partners. Many of you may know my co-founder, Michelle Dipp. At BioSpring, we invest in 3 subsectors: pharma services, tools, and software. Prior to BioSpring, my career was focused as a tech entrepreneur. I've helped start, build, and scale a number of B2B software companies.
Okay, all right. So Jennifer, you don't mind if we start with you, we'll just kind of go in the reverse order, I suppose. So the first question is, yeah, I mean, so everyone here has come, I mean, obviously it's not by accident, right? We've got very different backgrounds. We've got tech entrepreneurship, medicine and CS, academic science, health policy. And all of you have found over, I guess, you know, a long track record of success, but you're focusing now on the application of these emergent technologies in the life sciences. I guess the question is why? Like, what is it that interests you about this space at the moment? So Jennifer, would you like to start?
Yeah, and you know, this our thesis at BioSpring is exclusively focused on this rapidly growing convergence between tech and life sciences. So that's our whole reason for being. The way that Michelle and I came up with the idea to start BioSpring was we were both based in the Boston area many years ago. I still spend about half my time in Boston, but our shared observation and interest really started being pointed towards this emerging crop of companies that were being born at the intersection of tech and the life sciences. And on one end of the spectrum, you know, they were creating products that were really driving digital transformation that I think is sort of happening at a slightly slower and later rate than digital transformation has across other sectors, across the Fortune 500. But then at the other end of the spectrum, this intersection is creating brand new fundamental technologies that have the power to transform multiple sectors, synthetic biology being one of them. So we believe that this is an enormous opportunity to go after, and we're so excited to be investing in and supporting this next wave of transformational companies.
Okay, so there's kind of three key points here that I'm pretty sure we're going to touch on many times here. So one is basically improved computational methods, and particularly like, you know, the I guess the intersection of that and better mechanistic understanding of biology, like better techniques to do science, better understanding of the science itself, the convergence of those two. The second is digital transformation. And the third is, I suppose, it kind of influences the first, isn't it? So maybe it's two, like just kind of foundational biological discoveries that are happening at this moment. So that's very kind of positive, powerful set of reasons. Gaurav, I guess, you know, you've come from the CS side of then into medicine, and then I guess, you know, you've obviously explored a bunch of things at the intersection of computer science and medicine. What is it that is the kind of defining theme through that journey?
Yeah, defining themes is not something I'm good at, but you know, I think that the arc for me was very excited about computer science and data science, wanted to work in healthcare. Grew up as a product of the evidence-based medicine sort of community, especially in Harvard and sort of in academia. Sparred with my dad, who's on the call right now as an attendee. So hi, Dad. On this topic a bunch, who's been a doc for decades. And sort of the big takeaway for me was medicine feels like it's right for data to impact decision-making for providers and patients. And yet sort of throughout training, there wasn't a clear opportunity for that to become real for a whole number of reasons. Part of the reasons I went to Foundation Medicine is it felt like oncology was now reaching a tipping point. This was back in the early 2010s, that the complexity of the data and the decision-making was such that for the first time, doctors were asking for help, right? Sort of prior to that, it was really technologists pushing, you know, myself included, innovations in data science and methods and technology on physicians and being summarily rejected, essentially. Oncology and cancer genomics specifically felt like the tip of the iceberg where there was finally pull. One of the big realizations for me almost a decade later when I emerged on the other side of my work at Foundation Medicine is the world changed a lot in the last decade in ways we'll talk about across technology and sort of capabilities, across behavioral sort of motivations and incentives for adoption. And then finally, in terms of sort of business models that support a new class of products and solutions. And so now I think we're at a point where the things that I've always wanted to do feel like they're finally real and possible, at least in pockets, and a lot more to come. So I'd say that's the arc. And then along the way, realize that pharma and actually life sciences and R&D is actually much quicker to adopt many of these things. So although my passion, at least initially, has always been on the clinical applications of these things, increasingly I've recognized that the pharmaceutical industry and frankly R&D more broadly maybe a sort of lower hanging fruit and an entree to a lot of that. So those are probably the two areas of interest for slightly different reasons.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So again, okay. So we have some. Thank you. I've actually got a few follow-ups there if everyone doesn't mind. But it's okay. So we've got some interesting things here. So I think the first, which is I guess another general theme, is that it's quite likely that in terms of the application of these technologies, life sciences organizations that are arguably in more competitive environments and are obviously science-led organizations and have made previous investments in data infrastructure and computation, maybe in a way that's in advance of the payer provider organizations, are going to be more likely to move more quickly. And that's certainly a theme that came up in the previous conversations that we had, where we had discussions with folks more on the payer provider side. That totally makes sense. I guess, Gaurav, the obvious question that we have to ask is that, like, why do you think it's now a better time? Like, what is it that's changed? That's the first question.
Yeah, happy to take it now if you want, Trishan.
Yeah. That's great.
So, look, I think that's not. So, I think your demo of GPT-3 is remarkable. That's been buzzing all over Twitter and certainly my Twitter feed. We should talk about that when we come back to it. Huge technological innovations, but I don't think that's been the rate limiter, at least for the last decade. Because as you know, in medicine, like a linear regression is fine for 90% of what we need to do first. The challenge for me has been the other two pillars. It's what's the so what, right? What's the utility, whether clinical utility or R&D utility? And that burden of proof is significant. And then secondly, okay, let's assume it has utility. Who benefits and does everybody benefit? Because if one stakeholder doesn't benefit, as someone once described pharma to me, nobody can say yes, but everybody can say no, right? So if there's one actor in the healthcare system that doesn't benefit, it becomes a really tough path. What I saw when I sort of, again, popped up after my time at Foundation and looked around the ecosystem, really for the first time in a decade in that way, was a lot had changed on dimensions 2 and 3 there. And one classic example is a company I work with, Viz.ai, that with an AI-based stroke detection algorithm, demonstrated clinical utility, right? By detecting strokes earlier, they could intervene on many more individuals and sort of, relieve the blockage and restore sort of blood flow to the brain, save neurons before they're dead. And in doing so, somehow benefited every actor, right? They saved rehab and ICU stays for the payers. They enabled more procedures that fee-for-service systems can bill for. They enabled more usage of devices that the med device industry benefited from. And of course, patients benefited. That feels like a rare sort of unicorn where you see sort of grassroots adoption like wildfire because everything fit. But it wasn't the technology that was a rate limiter, right? We should talk about technology, and I'm sure we will. But I see those sort of second two pillars finally being addressed in a meaningful way.
Yeah, of course. And so that's interesting. Right. So the technology side is kind of, we're in a very interesting space with that as well, because it's not just happening in academia, the kind of conventional source of R&D, I suppose, in these areas, but also in large technology companies. And that's a very interesting trend that's fairly unique to machine learning, it seems, in that there's a lot more happening in industry than arguably is happening in academia regarding foundational advances. But it requires entrepreneurs, it requires people like you guys, it requires investors, it requires an ecosystem around them to translate that into some process in an organization. And it's always effectively the same, actually. You can put the technology back in a black box and say it's just process redesign. And what you're saying, Gaurav, I think we'd all agree with, is that it's figuring out what the process is, figuring out what the incentive network is around it, and then doing some kind of ground game re-engineering to make that happen. And that has taken some time to occur. But I also agree, like we have a point now where lots of organizations are doing that well. But the core thing, which I think hopefully we'll get time to talk about later, is to actually make these things work, you need to have a real systemic understanding of how the health system works, how the different orthogonal interests are, and how to align different stakeholders behind what's going on. Hopefully we'll kind of get back to that, because there's some interesting things to discuss there. But thank you. I've got a few other questions regarding, I'd love to know what this debate between you and your dad was, but maybe we can look into that later. Liz, do you mind next? Thanks so much for being. We have science to business, running a life sciences organization and investor in this area. Yeah, what's the kind of thread? What is it that's kind of motivated you to end up here?
Yeah, so I guess maybe I'll answer it by saying sort of like what excites me about the intersection of AI, machine learning, and biology is our ability to leapfrog forward, you know, and I think that is in across the whole domain. So many people know this. My brother had cancer when we were kids. He's fine, but it motivated me to want to become a scientist, right? I was very dissatisfied that all I could do was like hope and pray that he got better. I wanted some solid answers from the doctor about like, what was the treatment course? Like, what are we looking for? You know, when I was in kindergarten, like during this, and they couldn't give it to me then, right? And so it was that experience that was like, all right, well, like let's get into a laboratory in particular and see how we can start to uncover data that could sort of drive those decisions. And so, you know, I would say the majority of my life, I wanted to be a scientist, and I've spent more hours than not of my life in a lab, in a book, doing research. And I realized how inefficient it was in a lot of sort of different areas, right? And this is what gets me excited about AI. Like, for example, anybody on the call that's ever done like protein or RNA work, like you spend an awful lot of time growing up, you know, different proteins in, let's say, bacteria or in yeast, and testing like solubilization conditions. Like that data should be shared, and like that should not be the bottleneck to discovery, because you can't solubilize like a protein, right? And so it gets me excited that like now we are aggregating data and developing methods that let these sort of I know we're recording, so I'm going to try not to swear, these painful things, you know, not be sort of bottlenecks in our discovery, but like quick things that we can, you know, use AI and machine learning to sort of, you know, leapfrog forward. And that's just in like a pure academic sort of setting. I would say I'll pick up on Gaurav's thread. I get super excited about what AI and life sciences can do in both AI, the intersection of AI and life sciences can do in healthcare and in sort of, I'll say, drug and diagnostic discovery. In healthcare, super simple things can be easy answered. Like, I don't know if everybody's ever tried to get a primary care appointment. Like, you have to book like 6 months out, right? And heaven forbid you have to like reschedule that appointment. One of my employees had this thing, and then you get bumped to like 2 years later. There's got to be some algorithm that could sort of better structure and get people in, instead of, you know, somebody writing on a sheet who's on the wait list and things like that. So I think there's like super low hanging fruit. And then there's life-changing things like early confirmatory diagnosis and diagnostics. For neurodegeneration, it's crazy that like we wait for, you know, people to have these clinical manifestations that are irreversible for us to say you have a disease, right? We can do a lot better along those fronts. And so I'm super jazzed about both like what's going to happen in academia to drive discovery. And then that's just going to translate into more exciting companies, more exciting products. Maybe we license them, you know, or I invest in them, or sort of different areas. But it's a cool time where tech is no longer the rate limiting factor.
Yeah, it's good. Cool. Okay, well, we've got a lot of kind of positive voices here. Aman, thank you. I mean, I guess Aman also has a somewhat different journey and background here, which he didn't kind of get the chance to go into. But so, Aman, would you mind kind of giving us the long form version? I think it also ties together a few of these things.
And I'll tie it together with sort of, you know, so I'll just state up front. My thesis is that we're at an inflection point with regards to sort of AI, data science, machine learning, and sort of healthcare and life sciences. And we can get into the thesis of that maybe a little bit later. I'll just kind of give you a couple of tidbits here. So just quickly, you know, my background, I've been trained only in schools of public health. So graduate degrees in epidemiology, and then also sort of health services, research, health economics. And, you know, one of the things I think about that's fundamentally different now than when I was training is just the talent is different. The types of courses you get are different, right? You've got actually data science classes in biostatistics and other parts, you know, in computational epidemiology that did not exist before. So that's sort of one part of why I think part of the thesis of why we think an inflection point is the talent is fundamentally different today than it was even 5 years ago, you know, let alone 20 years ago. So I think that's going to create a huge sea change going forward, because you have these available open source types of tools available to you to be able to do statistics on large scale data that I couldn't do when I was training. So it's sort of kind of like one thing and a little bit about my background. And I would say that in the first part of this century, in the 2000s, I think we're all sort of waiting around for the open sourcing of all those tools and a lot more data to become available, right? So that's sort of the first part. And then in the second part, right, 2010, there's a lot of things that changed. And I worked in the government for a long time, and then I left and I started the first formal data science team at Merck in 2013, 2014, when a lot of other companies were starting them. And now we're getting into, companies are evolving, biopharma companies are evolving their data science practices. And we're probably going into this another era in this decade. So sort of mark it by the first part of this century, the first decade, the second decade, third decade. And those are all marked by huge changes in talent, the amount of data that's available, and the kind of tech stack that we now have. And we've seen this evolution where we're starting just to hit that inflection point. So I'd sort of argue kind of that. And to give you a data point around that, if you think back, as US-centric data point, if you think back to, 15 years ago, 08, 09, 2010, the amount of sort of the healthcare system that had been digitized with electronic medical records, hospitals and doctors' practices was under 10%. We're at past 90% now. Yes, EMRs are causing all sorts of other types of issues and problems that we have to make sure we address on the one hand. On the other hand, we have data that is flowing. And then there are companies that are popped up to connect all of that data, even in just the last 3 or 4 years alone. And so we've got data flowing, we've got a lot of open source tools, we've got talent, and then there's an enormous amount of venture funding and capital that's coming off the sidelines to fund, everything from drug discovery and on with respect to life sciences. And so, I joined Vertex in 2017, was asked to build from scratch the data science team here. Why? Because we're in the midst of that inflection point just starting. And so what I'm excited about, sort of to wrap all that up into a bow, is that we're at a point of maturity now that the ingredients are all there simultaneously at the same time that took the last 20 years to develop, that now I think we'll see a little bit of an acceleration. We'll also see a lot of pain and there's a lot of hype. We'll talk about that separately, but we're going to see an acceleration where you're going to start to see also things scale, algorithms that people have built and developed, right? New sort of innovation that's going to come out because all those things are together. So for me, I'm just excited about where we are, and I'd argue we're at this point in time now where you're going to see an acceleration. And then within, there's a lot to be excited about, in terms of the techniques that are now available to us that were not available, some of which even just 5 years ago. So I'll pause there, Tristan.
No, excellent. Thank you. Thank you. I think we've got a bit of a delay on things, so I hope everyone can hear me. Okay, that's great. Thank you so much, Alan. Thank you, everyone. It's okay. There's a lot to dig into here, so I think we should just start off with this kind of inflection point idea. So we've got like some general themes here. I think everyone is in agreement. I think, and I'll put this out to the audience. If anyone is not in agreement, anyone is violently opposed, then that's what we have the second half of this discussion for. So, and that's totally fine. That's why we're here. Especially if you're Dr. Singhal Senior, we'd definitely like to hear some opposing points of view. But okay, let's talk about the technology side of this. So, Gaurav, if you don't mind, if I go back to you, as you're the first one that mentioned it. There were things that were, I think the really interesting thing about this field is there's some kind of benchmark which is shattered through some conceptual insight that is turned into a technique that becomes relatively broadly available. And then after that, you see these things being put into products and applied within organizations. And then even after that, I think the point you made earlier, a very good one, there's the kind of slower burn, cultural change that is required from clinicians and clinical organizations to make them more accepting. And R&D organizations, of which life sciences tend to be a bit faster with that, but still that kind of cultural change needs to happen. What are the kind of things here that excite you most in terms of technical things that you feel are going to be these catalysts that we're in that adoption cycle of?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I want to clarify a comment I made earlier, right? The rate limiters, pillars 2 and 3, right? The sort of behavioral incentives and the business model, they apply, I think, most to the clinical application of these things, right? Where the technology, the bar is super low. On the life sciences side, the nice thing is that the business model piece is actually quite clear, right? There's only one person you have to convince, which is the life sciences company, that this will ultimately be financially in your interest. And you don't have to convince a whole bunch of other stakeholders. I think that simplifies that part completely. The cultural piece is actually a really important point.
Gaurav, so could I just interrupt?
Yeah, please.
Just for the benefits of the audience, some of whom may not have been through this kind of sales cycle thing, or maybe thinking about going through it with life sciences organizations. Like, what is the kind of financial articulation or an example of a few of why these techniques are valuable?
Well, so there's a single stakeholder. That doesn't mean it's easy. So just to clarify that point, right? I think my view of this world, and we're sort of on a bit of a detour, but let's follow it for a second, is if you think about drug development simply as sort of discovery, development, commercialization, right? It becomes, attribution becomes clearer and clearer as you get further down that sort of chain, right? So if you're in the bucket of commercialization and you can increase the addressable market of a therapeutic product through some application of AI, the value creation step there is obvious and it's attributable, right? You get to clinical development and you speed time to trial, or, you know, cost of recruitment, or, you know, any number of things that are reasonably measurable and more or less directly attributable to the role that technology or data science played in that. That is also reasonably sort of clear, and the value, I think, is capturable by the entity that creates it. I know a lot of the excitement, especially amongst this group and for this topic, is around discovery, and would love to hear from Aman, Liz, and Jennifer on their views on that topic. But to me, discovery has always been challenging for a couple of reasons. Number one, you usually don't see the benefit of the impact of, let's say, an optimization and discovery for many years, right? Until ultimately you get through the entire clinical development chain. There's two challenges with that. Number one, we know the probability of an early sort of target ultimately making it through to sort of clinical application is like single-digit percentages, right? So if you have an innovation that doubles the likelihood of success, you may have increased likelihood of success from 3% to 6%, right? So everybody here who's a clinical scientist, like, how do you actually study that and prove that? Secondly, you're not doing this as an RCT, right? There's a million other sort of entities along that way, all of whom are incentivized to take credit for that increased probability of success, right? So attribution at the front end is really hard. So at least my experience has been, if you're going to sell into the sort of big pharma, selling it on the commercial is the easiest. Clinical development is sort of second. Discovery is the hardest. And in some cases, if you really want to capture the value on the discovery side, you have to vertically integrate and just take the bet yourself. But then you have to be an AI company and a data company and a technology company, a drug discovery company, and a drug development company, all of which are like different skill sets, right? So very curious to hear from others how you think about that part of the problem on the financial incentive side. We can come back to the technology piece, Trishan, but I think that's an interesting challenge.
Yeah. Do you mind if we...
Oh, sorry. Can I just jump in? Yeah, I think Gaurav's point is a great one, but I also think there's been like a seismic shift in how pharma companies think about AI and integrating into their drug discovery processes. You know, AI in chemistry was like unheard of maybe 5 years ago, maybe even 3 years ago. You know, now everybody is doing AI to make sure the thing that you think you're making, you know, to do API identification. And to Gaurav's point, like when I started Alaris, our pitch to biopharma was clear, like we can help make your drugs work better and get them through clinical trials faster. Makes sense, right? But nobody wanted to sort of get on board with that because there weren't any sort of success stories about it. So people were still willing to take that chance of like, I know I only have, you know, a POS, probability of success, of less than 10%, but like, let me go for it. Now I think that things have actually changed. I think it's more rare to see a company go through clinical development without a biomarker strategy, and how you select the right sort of partner for drug development optimization or patient stratification, I think has been a shift. And actually, maybe I'll punt my next question to Aman. I'm sure at Vertex, you guys must have to sort of sift through different types of these applications as you guys are making your next drug candidates.
Yeah, I'll just offer a little bit of a different perspective. So, for us, our company was founded in 1989, around based drug design, and we consider that to be data science and AI. We just didn't call it that. And if you think about sort of the realms of computational chemistry and computational biology, computational genomics, I would argue sort of that's sort of been the genesis, the origin point of data science in I would say a lot of healthcare, which goes back, arguably, and if you think about bioinformatics, goes back arguably decades. And we've had sort of computational chemistry teams for decades, and computational genomics more recently. And so for us, we believe actually we've had AI on the drug discovery side and machine learning in particular for quite some time, and we have been using and deploying it in very sophisticated ways. What I see and what I'm excited about is, kind of as you go up from sort of cellular, molecular to the patient, to the population, at the patient level and the population level, now, with schools of public health and other schools, those techniques have started to go from computational chemistry, computational biology, over to computational epidemiology, computational health economics, and they've started to come into play there. And so I'm excited that sort of everybody's at the party, so to speak, and has been borrowing from what others have done. And so plus with whatever's happened in the tech, to come back to your question, Trish, around technology, what's happened in the tech sector with the tech infrastructure, all of this coming together now. So I think for us, we have a view that there's just been a much longer run here, and we've been investing in it for quite some time. We are now deploying sort of machine learning, data science for other parts for how we run our company. So in clinical trials, in commercial, in things like G&A functions, everything from investor relations to HR. And so that is also, I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there, and a lot of efficiency to be gained. So maybe a little bit of a different perspective that I could offer from my side.
No, that's super helpful. Okay, so that's a consistent theme that also Liz brought out earlier as well. There's the kind of iconic applications, kind of, I guess the equivalent, like, so drug discovery would clearly be there, which is, I guess, the parallel on the clinical side of automation of diagnosis. But there's plenty of like other administrative, maybe administrative is the wrong word. There's plenty of other workflows that have less risk, maybe are less obvious, that have potential for benefit before we get anywhere close to that, which I think is a very consistent theme. Thank you for that. Jennifer, it'd be great to hear your point of view as an investor, I guess on the other side of the table.
Yeah, I was just going to add, one observation that we have. So I think while, and it really ties to the point, one of the Aman's earlier points around just the evolution in the profile of the staffing of these organizations, which has unlocked life sciences companies' ability to accelerate the manner in which they're harnessing new and emerging technologies. There is one obstacle, I think, that still remains, which we just require a little bit more time to break through on. And that is, with the changing staffing profile across life sciences companies, we're still in the early stages of forming standard procurement processes around software and AI technologies, right? I'm sure that each company as a standalone business has very standardized processes, but how that impacts our companies and other emerging companies across the sector is that there is no standard, best of breed sales motion for any one of these companies to build a sales force against to accelerate their go-to-market. And in fact, many businesses, ones we're invested in, others that we're close to, that are generating revenues well over $100 million in revenue annually, still don't have robust sales forces, because the sales processes across the life sciences customers that they work with are so bespoke from company to company.
Interesting. Okay, and how do you see that playing out, if you don't mind me kind of putting you on the spot? I mean, that just an inherent inefficiency of the fact the market is fragmented, so therefore you're going to have a non-standardizable sales process, or do you think that is going to be resolved?
I don't think that. So I think that the fragmentation will continue to exist. And what does that mean? That means that you won't have one standard sales process or one sales playbook that you'll be able to run across the entire sector. However, as we do gain more time and experience in working with, evaluating, and purchasing and partnering with technology teams. And as these experienced people and talent managers start working across other companies, I think greater standardization will start to proliferate, but I don't think that it'll ever be just one single playbook that a team can take and run with across the sector.
Okay, cool. Thank you all. Okay, so I mean, we've got a ridiculously compressed amount of time here. So we're going to have to kind of shift on a little bit, even though there's a bunch of other questions that we were ready to kind of discuss, and I think are logical kind of things to follow on from what we discussed before. But I think we're going to open up some audience questions if Nikki is ready and willing to do that.
Yes,
Cool.
absolutely.
Okay, great.
And thank you. Thank you all for the conversation, great debate, great discussion. Those we can answer here, we'll definitely keep adding them because we're going to have a LinkedIn live debate after. I'm going to start with this question about fundamental challenges we're actually facing to access and use relevant data. So, you know, the data is existing, but there's a lot of silos within companies and across the healthcare system, and that creates a lot of barriers for everyone, particularly startups who really can access this data. Opening up to the floor of panelists, you know, what's your view on how to actually accelerate access to that data to fuel R&D? And what I would say is, of course, while balancing, you know, privacy and other concerns related to that. Throwing to the floor, whoever wants to jump in.
Yeah, I'll take a quick stab. You know, so I think it's a combination of problems here, at least when you're at a large organization. So I think one, if you don't have an explicit strategy around what you're going to do with data, then those silos will just not go away. That's just sort of you know, very difficult to overcome. And you know, interestingly, I just saw a survey from McKinsey. I think they surveyed, I think, north of 100 different people in various life sciences companies. And it seemed as if a lot of people now do actually have leadership buy-in and do have a strategy or forming a strategy. So I think that's number one. You have to have an explicit strategy around what you are going to do with data. And then number two, it gets down to executing against that strategy. And then I think that the third thing is that's always very difficult, is always just the sort of the human behavior. You know, Gaurav kind of mentioned this before, the people problem. You know, do you have leaders in place who are willing to, you know, think about the greater good of your organization versus their fiefdom? And that will always be there forever. That is an evergreen problem. And you have to overcome that through strategy and execution and a whole host of other sort of techniques. And so I think I'll just finish by saying, I think different organizations have different types of sort of intensity of silos, and it's not the same everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I'll just pick up on one point that Aman made, which is this idea of fiefdoms, right? And if you look at sort of the provider data world for a moment, right, real world data, so to speak, there's tons of fragmentation, at least in the US healthcare system, right? And each provider, sort of health system, et cetera, is its own little island. And so how did that ultimately get unlocked? Was you had visionary people, sort of visionary / delusional, or sort of two sides of the same coin, who just took a bet, right? And said that I'm going to be the inspiration for this. There are a bunch of companies that did this sort of over the last decade and went and sort of banded together all the disparate sort of components. And now real world data from sort of, you know, care of individuals as part of routine care is now sort of, that's just common, right? Like we take that for granted. If you take that and think about pharma data, which I think was part of the question, right? Pharma has its own fiefdoms, not just across different pharma companies, but even within pharma, right? Each therapeutic area team and maybe even each program team, right, has its own like governance and data storage and infrastructure, et cetera, right? And I think like the same problem we saw on the provider side is being mimicked on the life sciences pharma side. And similarly, you've got all these different fiefdoms. And I think we just need, again, a sort of inspired, visionary, possibly delusional sort of leader who says, no, this is going to be really valuable and important to drive efficiencies in R&D in the next generation of medicines, and come and take a swing, right? And then unify people sort of grassroots. And as proof points build, hopefully that should sort of pick up its own steam. So I think that's how this ultimately plays out.
Yeah. I totally agree. I think this question it's such a challenging one, and hopefully we're making progress. I want to jump to, Trishna has underlined this is a very tactical discussion. And so one of the people in our audience is asking for concrete examples of how AI is being used in clinical care delivery and drug discovery. Anyone who wants to jump in there?
I'm happy to take a clinical care. Actually, Liz, I saw you come off mute. Why don't you start?
Sure. So, I mean, the whole thesis of our company is to combine, metabolomics and AI or machine learning to improve diagnosis, right? So, at Olaris, we're developing diagnostic tools to both first better diagnose disease, better sequence therapies, and then better monitor for adverse effects. So swimming around in all of us, there are biological markers, biomarkers, DNA, RNA, proteins, or metabolites, which is the thing that we measure. And the levels of these things tell a lot about what's going on in your body. So we do all kinds of studies in different disease classes to be able to find these signatures and correlate it with an actionable phenotype, whether it's for, an early confirmatory diagnosis for Parkinson's, to help sequence drugs in oncology, or in kidney transplant patients, help them know, honestly, just like what's going on, are you okay, and things like that. And so I think there are numerous examples of where, AI already has, I think, maybe Foundation Medicine or others, products existing on the market, or a burgeoning pipeline of products that will be part of our routine care going forward.
Mm-hmm. Great. And Gaurav, did you want to jump in too?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's right. And one good example, for a concrete example, is there's a bunch of data already generated by the healthcare system, right? We've been doing it for years, decades, that are very high dimensional data sets, right? So EKGs, right? Radiographs, pathology that's now being digitized, EEGs, right? There's a whole bunch of these things from which I think almost everybody would agree we extract a very small amount of signal, right? And a lot of that is because it's manual. So as a 30,000 foot level view, one I think would be justified in believing there must be more signal there, right? In terms of applications, I think where folks' mind usually jumps to, where my mind certainly jumped to initially, was we should be able to predict treatment response, right? And I want to know who's going to respond and not respond to this therapy, the sort of dream of precision medicine. It's what we did at Foundation Medicine. It's what many other companies have done and continue to do. It turns out that's a very important and very hard problem, and one that takes a lot of time and a lot of investment and has just stochastic risk. There are easier problems to solve, and one example is screening for rare diseases, right? So you can now demonstrably screen for rare cardiovascular conditions from EKGs. You can screen for rare genomic biomarkers from a normal pathology slide. These are things that every person who interacts with the healthcare system with a related condition gets already, right? And so I think a concrete application is a number of entities that are now using those same signals. Somebody already got a pathology slide. We can screen it implicitly in the background using AI to identify if they're at risk, enriched risk, high probability of having a rare genomic marker, right? And then you can see the natural translation of that to, well, that person should probably get sequenced, right? Or this person is at risk from their EKG of having a rare cardiovascular condition, right? They should probably get an echocardiogram. So these are things where the data already exist, right? One needs to just develop the algorithms, which has already happened, at least in academia. And now the real step is apply it and make sure that the right people are sort of motivated from a financial standpoint. And that is happening. And I think we'll see that's low-hanging fruit that I think we'll see even in the next few years.
Gaurav, I've got a kind of follow-up to what you're saying, I guess a question as well, but yeah, okay, so you raised a lot of very interesting points here. So I think just to reflect for everyone, I mean, so where there's already structured data and the R&D work has been done in academia, it should kind of inevitably be, and those are tied to clinically important problems with business models around them. Those things are already occurring and should inevitably scale. But I think the point that you also brought up there is that the vast majority of the data that we have available, certainly on the clinical side, is unstructured, right? It's kind of stored in the medical record in idiosyncratic language that we write for all kinds of different purposes. But that is now becoming tractable, right? Would you be able to talk? I mean, I think that's one of the most, this kind of current large language model obsession that many people have. I think one of the things that makes it very practical and answers this question is that the vision of a learning healthcare system, everyone's been bought into for years. And there's been so many papers and position statements and all that stuff. And it was thought that a digital substrate would enable that. And to a certain extent, that's true. The problem, of course, is that most of that digital substrate is unstructured and therefore kind of functionally not particularly useful to solve the kind of problems that you're bringing up. But we now have the ability, with the way that technology has advanced, I believe, in the last couple of years, to take the unstructured data and increase the territory of structured data that we could then use with these kind of approaches. I'd just like to kind of throw it out to all of you. I mean, is that something you agree with? Is that something you disagree with? What do you think?
I can take a swing, Trishan. Number one, agree with the thesis, right? A huge part of the work I did in this last chapter was working with Flatiron Health to manually sort of abstract notes. Lots of other people, Concert AI, Tempest, are sort of doing this now. It's a highly manual process, but it's very effective, right? We've demonstrated its validity for research and regulatory grade applications published on it, worked with FDA, et cetera, et cetera. So believe in that. Sort of second point is I spent years before that trying to work on NLP to do this. And this was 2010-ish, and concluded at the time that it was not possible, right? That you could get like 80, 90% of the way there. You needed a human arbiter at the end of it. And the final point I'll make, my observation is that AI is not good enough until all of a sudden it is, and then it's incredible, right? And for me, the first like major example of this was Google Photos sort of face detection, when it traced pictures of my kids from now to like when they were born, and with 100% accuracy. It was sort of a blow away moment for me where, you know, image analysis is sort of mediocre. Holy cow, it's really good, right? That's how I felt this last week, seeing all the Chat GPT stuff, which is, you know, natural language is a hard problem, not solvable. Holy cow, this is amazing. So, you know, this is not anything concrete. It's a hypothetical, but it feels to me that you're never going to get people to structure the data on the way in, I believe. That's another sort of axiom of mine. My beliefs, but it does seem very plausible that you'll be able to automate the data extraction out. The question is just, when do you hit that tipping point when it's not good enough? Holy cow, it's amazing, right? And so it feels like we're close to that. I don't know, but anyway.
I think that's a good point, right? Of like a little note of caution that we're not there yet, right? You know, so AI can do and is doing a lot, but I think there's still more that we need to understand to make sure that we're putting all of this in context and making sure that we're, you know, examining any potential root cause bias, because I mean, there are just huge cases where AI gets it wrong and you don't realize until something terrible has happened, right? And especially in, you know, I know we're talking about both life sciences and healthcare now. Those are some big risks, right, to make. So I would just urge, you know, all this talk about there's like a shift in demographics and staff to go towards data. I actually think that we need to actually double down on biology as well and show some sort of respect for just, you know, how complicated these processes are, and acknowledge the algorithm doesn't know the question that you're asking. The algorithm just says, you set it up, find two differences about this, right? It doesn't know all the nuances of a patient's history and X, Y, and Z. And so, while I remain bullish and excited, I also do think it's important, especially now, to be cautious.
I'll add a couple of comments. Completely agree with both Elizabeth and Gaurav. I don't think that the problem to be solved any longer is around the information or the data extraction. Like, I think we're very far along with NLP. We're far along with image analysis. The nuance that I'd add is it's really about knowledge extraction at this point, right? And in order to effectively extract knowledge from any of these databases or files, we require the underlying understanding, whether it be in the form of ontologies or knowledge bases or knowledge graphs, to enable the knowledge extraction to drive whatever processes we want. And I think that piece remains very challenging in the healthcare and life sciences space, simply because there's still so much work to do to codify the knowledge that we have to then drive AI.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so I would say here, and I guess Gaurav and I have some amount of bias in this as well. So our friend at MIT, David Zontag, produced the paper in, I believe it was in June, could have been in May, something like that. Anyway, but it says large language models are zero-shot clinical information extractors. And it basically shows how using like out-of-the-box GPT-3, in this case, a large language model, it exceeded the technical benchmarks in 4 kind of core areas, kind of complicated problems in extracting knowledge out of EHRs. So that's in the research world within the last, 6 months. So I think just for everyone, I'm happy to share this later, but we are at a very interesting time here. I think that's the kind of thing. Okay, so we just before we go into like summing up, I'll kind of explain what we're going to do with the rest of the questions in a second. Just a quick thing, if you guys could kind of rewind back, say a decade ago, to the version of yourself that was kind of a decade ago and starting on this journey, is there any advice you'd give yourself based on what you've learned about how the future is going to unfold? If not, it's totally fine as well. I appreciate it's a bit of an abstract question, but if anyone wants to take a stab at that, I can leave it open to you, or I'll kind of go into the quick summing up.
Trish, maybe I just sort of offer something about this is, I think, one thing, I think it's probably two things. So one is sort of for me, just always remember to invest in the long run, because it takes years to see impact when you're working in such a complex space, and all those problems do present themselves. Data silos, bad data, what is going to be your direct impact? And it takes a long time, but it comes. You can start to see the flywheel effect actually happen, but that's literally can take years. So sort of some patience and investing in the long run and having that sort of mindset is super important. I think the other thing is, simultaneously being the most skeptical person and the optimistic person in the room, because there's such an enormous amount of hype, right? And knowing and having the judgment about what is real, what is not real, and then also taking some risk about pushing something forward because of all the problems that do exist that a lot of people are pointing out on the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, plus one to Aman's comments, I was going to say patience. I was probably, many people would say, still am quite impatient, got a lot of that sort of advice from bosses and mentors along the way. And I think just time felt compressed at the time, and it feels like there's a lot of time to solve these things. And for me, I think the biggest thing was to sort of meet the world where it is, which is sort of antithetical to, I think, a lot of venture bets, especially. But there was a set of problems to work on in 2010 that were the right ones to work on, and only now is it time to work on the things that didn't make sense back then. I realize that's a very sort of general statement, but
no.
But the sort of the arc is long. I think that would have been helpful for me.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Jennifer?
I agree again with all of the comments. I think just personally, I probably would have made the jump over to the healthcare sector earlier had I known just sort of the size and the magnitude of the opportunity and the potential impact that technology has to play in the sector.
Okay, cool. Liz, last but definitely not least.
Oh gosh, no pressure. Should I wrap? No, just kidding. No, I think I echo the same sort of things. I would just tell myself to acknowledge the progress that you're making. I think everybody probably here has big dreams and big hopes to, cause these, again, seismic changes, but sometimes that happens just like stepwise, right? And it's only when you look back that you see how you've influenced a field or, been part of, a shift in how people think. And so I think we're all kind of seeing sort of patience and progress.
Thank you. And thank you all. Okay, so just to kind of sum up, firstly, thank you all thanks to our panel. Thanks to all of you from wherever you are for tuning in and taking some time out of your day. We appreciate you're all busy, so we very much appreciate you spending your time with us here. I think a couple of things in follow-up. So there's obviously a bunch of questions here that we haven't addressed. Each time we do this, we think we should probably make it like a 2 or 3 hour conversation, but realistically, we always end up going back to maybe this 1 hour format just to kind of whet your appetites is best. This time, to kind of continue it, as Nikki suggested earlier, what we're probably going to do is take some of these questions and we'll basically ask them asynchronously in LinkedIn. So if you're listening, if you add us, if you add me in particular on LinkedIn, then I will post the questions and the assembled experts here will answer them asynchronously. We'll probably do it for like 2 or 3 of them over time, and you can participate and feel free to kind of throw fruit or eggs or flowers, whatever you kind of feel back at us. So that's going to be coming. So if you kind of follow us there on LinkedIn, we can take care of that. The second thing is I might post some kind of resources in terms of further reads here, because we've touched on a bunch of things for which there is information out there if you want to kind of find out about some of the things that we mentioned. And then the last one is kind of in terms of future sessions. We have 2 options really that we're going with. One is probably a dedicated session on natural language processing or large language models, maybe even, because they've just moved so far ahead. It's so foundational. We kind of danced around it a little bit here, but maybe if we just have a discussion based on that. If anyone has any thoughts, please let me know, and we'll kind of noodle it here. And then otherwise, we're probably going to start also looking at behavioral health a little bit as well, or mental health, whatever the general term you want to use this, because it's such a big area and it's this kind of interesting confluence of public health, healthcare, business, and some kind of real scientific advances as well. So that's that. I think to close this out, I know we're over time. I'm just going to give you a quick summary. We set up a very basic pipeline that did some text to speech on the conversation as we were having it. And then we've fed that into GPT-3 to produce a summary, and I'm just going to read it to you. So the discussion on AI in the life sciences focused on the potential of AI to improve healthcare, as well as the challenges and opportunities in this area. The panelists included medical, business, and public health experts who shared their perspective on the practical application of AI in the life sciences. They discussed the need for better data management and collaboration, the development of interpretable AI models, and the ethical considerations of using AI in healthcare. The panelists also emphasized the importance of bringing new ideas to market quickly and ensuring equitable distribution across different demographics. Overall, the discussion highlights the potential of AI to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of research and development in the life sciences. Thank you very much.